Welcome to Prose from the Underground, coming to you from my basement in northern Michigan, where I read, write, think, and say things, and sometimes I get to talk to someone. I'm giddy because tonight I got to talk with Patricia Ann McNair, or Patty. I first met Patty 12 or 13 years ago, back when I was going public with my effort to write fiction. I'd written plenty, I'd studied on my own, but I didn't know with fiction if I had all the right parts. I didn't know what I could get away with. So I signed up, walked into Patty's workshop, and thought instantly, I can do this. Because Patty has a roll up your sleeves and get to work approach to writing. No nonsense, no pretense. She knows a million things about craft. Her stories, of course, are full of craft. But the craft lurks beneath your own pleasure. As Lee K. Abbott used to say, all the work for the writer, all the pleasure for the reader. That's clearly happening in Patty's stories. They're deeply pleasurable. They're full of thick, intimate scenes, sometimes deeply uncomfortable moments. She's going to read a brief passage from Responsible Adults, and then she's going to offer some really sound advice. I hope you enjoy.
Thank you, John. Great to see you. So this is from the short story, My Mother's Daughter. Boys liked me, my fleshy parts that made me different from the other girls. At the roller rink, they'd ask me for couple skate, and sometimes even the moonlight skate when the lights went down and that mirror ball sent fireflies over the walls, the floors, our faces. And we'd circle the rink for a while, and the music was always slow. When I was really young, my mom brought me to the rink on Saturday afternoons for kids skate. And there used to be an organ player, a real guy in a booth near the shoe rental. And he and my mom used to laugh together, and he'd play I Dream Of, and he'd lean toward her and say her name then. And once I watched while she sat next to him on his bench, and he put his hand high on her leg while the other hand spread wide over a few chords. Now, though, it was records all together on a tape that hissed sometimes. And me and a boy would hold hands, palms wet and fingers laced, and he'd guide me off the floor and into a corner where during moonlight, kids would press up against the wall and make out until one of the guards, a high school boy with a whistle and a flashlight, would swoop in to break things up. But before that, one or another of my moonlight partners would put his tongue in my mouth and his hand under the buttons of my blouse, and I knew then the foggy warmth of want.
Intimate, which is something that you excel at. I asked you to consider a passage that just seems to work. Where all your energy and effort and labor as a writer paid off. And that's the passage you read. Could you say more about why you think that dang passage just paid off?
Thanks for that. Excuse me. I think, I was thinking about that, and there are a lot of pieces I think that as we're writing, we'll think, that's it. I'm a writer now. I got that. And a lot of them don't actually make it to the final draft, right? This was one that came pretty quickly and easily right from the beginning and didn't really change much since then. And so that's part of it. But I was also thinking, I've been watching your wonderful Prose from the Underground. So I was thinking about this idea of yearning. And I have often thought that my stories have to do with longing. And then I was thinking, well, what's the difference between yearning and longing? And I actually have become quite enamored with the idea of yearning since I was watching your very first episode talking about that, and the idea of yearning and the things that we're making, the books that we're writing, the stories we're writing. And to my mind, that yearning it's almost aspirational. It's a sort of a forward desire, and longing to some extent is a backwards desire to my mind. It's sort of like I long for what was, or at least that's the way we often pair it, right? So for this part, for me, this section, it encapsulates a little bit of both of the yearning for something to come. She's yearning to be an adult. She's yearning to be like her mother, that sort of thing. But an intimacy, I think that most of these stories have to do with a yearning for some sort of intimacy, whether it's closeness with family or friends. But then also the idea of longing for what was the Saturdays when she would come with her mother to the roller rink, the way that it used to be real music and not just tapes, that hiss sometimes. So I was interested in that sort of dynamic of both yearning and longing wrapped up in the same paragraph. And then also, because this is from the collection Responsible Adults, there is always the question, I think, as a reader, like, who's responsible here? What do you mean, responsible adults, or like, oh yeah, responsible adults, and this paragraph held both of those things for me too. The mother, the yearning of the mother, the yearning of the daughter, who's really the responsible one. So it isn't an easy thing to wrap your mind around in terms of craft, but I do think that some of the things that happen craft-wise in this section are that it's first-person point of view from this girl, not told with much narrative distance. Pretty much the whole story is pretty close to when things happened. But she is also, throughout this whole story, but especially in this section, she is sort of imagining the point of view of her mother as well. So she's expanding her awareness into what she believes of her mother. And so that's a bit of a crafty thing, I think, in this story. And then in a lot of them too, they're often told close to the child's point of view. And the child is often trying to figure out what the adult's point of view would be.
So good. In fact, I want to go back through and read some of these with this longing, yearning tension in place. It's something that I never considered. And now I'm going to go down that rabbit hole, I think, for the next few nights, thinking about the tug and pull between past and present, or past and future, which makes the present maybe feel really weird and lonely in a way, and like the sound of one's voice in the present speaking. So my question is perhaps unfair because you have so many things that you've taught over the years to people like me. Today, end of July 2022, of all the things that you think, gee, if I could say one thing that I want fiction writers to concentrate on, what would it be?
Well, you mentioned Bonnie Jo Campbell, and there's so much to admire in her work. And you were talking about that idea that something reads sort of cleanly, but at the same time, that there's a lot at play there. And her stories are so very much like that. And, like you just read it, you're through it, you got through, but then you go back and you look again and you're like, wait a second, look what she did here. Look at how there's all of this layering that's happening here. And so I guess that's one of the things that I would say is really important to pay attention to. And it's kind of a two-sided coin. So I'm cheating a little bit here. So it's both sort of embrace the glorious chaos, the abundance of early writing, and then harness it. and so that harnessing comes through structure. I think that, we all have so many stories, so many lovely stories to tell, and so much to say about them, that often we get lost in the muck and in the weeds. But I think the muck and the weeds are really important. I don't think we know what our stories are about until we have walked around in the muck and the weeds for a good long time, and just really sort of, I want a little of this, and I want a little of this, and we're gathering and pulling things up. And then once we've got like this, all of this stuff that we're holding, then we figure out, okay, so now what do I do? And that's where the structure comes in. There's, that silly show, that comedy show, Friends, that used to be out in the whatever knots or whatever. I never really watched it much, but I remember watching it once and seeing one of the women, the one who's really controlling, I don't know who she is, but
I don't know either. I know I think there are three on the show.
So there's a woman who's really controlling, and somebody says something about, you're never spontaneous, blah, 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 blah. And she goes, well, I like rules. Rules give structure to the fun. And to me, that's kind of like what I'm talking about. Find the rules that will have the fun, and then find the rules that will sort it out for you. I think a lot of times when we start to write, and particularly when we're new writers, we're aiming for something really, really, we're really sort of lasering in towards something. And I don't think that's going to serve us very well. I think we have to just sort of broadcast, do everything that we can, and then let what it's about and where it's going to go, let that emerge from all of that stuff that we've been juggling and putting on the page. So it's sort of like both, embrace the abundance, and then sort through it and figure out what to do with it. And that comes through reading. Structure ideas comes through reading. You have to learn to read. Perhaps one of the most important structural things to know is how to make a scene, right?
Okay. I promised myself I wouldn't ask follow-ups, but one of the things that I think we'll have to do, and maybe you'll come back again, is structure. What exactly? There are so many different dimensions and elements in any given subgenre even. And so you have to have a structural vocabulary, a repertoire to pull from so that you can help make sense of all the fun that you've said. And so you answered my follow-up. Well, you have to read. In other words, to develop a repertoire.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's true. And then you start to say, okay, well, how did they contain this thing? Anne-Marie Ullman, I know Anne-Marie Ullman has this beautiful essay about finding the container, and I think that once we find containers, the things in which to hold our stories, and maybe it means that the structure is a letter story. Maybe it means that it's a traditional 3-act, story. Maybe it means it's a list story. There's a whole lot of different forms and structures you could use. But I don't think we can figure that out until we know what we have to talk about.
That was incredibly helpful for me. I think that it will be for others. So let me just ask one last question to you personally. Here you are in your life. You have a great body of work behind you, and I think all of us hope still in front of you. So it's summer, middle of summer. You're living your life. What are you writing?
Well, I am writing a novel. Or let me just say, I am trying to write a novel. I am trying to figure out how to write a novel. I'm 200 pages in. I think I'm about 20 pages from the end.
Wow.
So when you had Mary Kay Zarevloff on recently, and she said the one important thing to know is finish, I was like, damn it. So I'm trying to finish that, but I am also one of those people that it helps me to know I have something else to write afterwards, so I don't get like too freaked out that I will be living alone. I have a million drafts I still have to do, but so I won't be gone from these people for a while. But in the meanwhile too, and this is partly a structural thing, I've been looking at sort of very brief memoir material and structural, like a lot of times the structure might just be a word count. Sometimes it might be a list. Sometimes it might be a hermit crab essay, that kind of thing. So I've been working with these little things that are more or less about my brothers, the men in my family. And the novel is, it disturbs me to say it's actually historical fiction because it takes place in the 70s. How can my childhood be historical fiction?
That's great. Is that what people say now? Is the 70s historical?
Well, it's like 40 years. Historical fiction writers say 40 years and more is historical. So,
yeah, that's a little depressing, I guess. It's sort of like when you listen to classic rock and you hear a song, you're like, oh, I love this. Oh, crap, I'm a dinosaur.
Yeah, exactly. So the novel is, it takes place in a lake community, very much like many lake communities in Michigan. It actually was born in a small lake community in Michigan when I was writing there once. Small community in the 70s, very close-knit community that various things happened that disturbs the balance of that. That's the novel.
One quick follow-up, because you brought up Mary Kay Zarevloff's note. Do you feel like you know what the story's about? And I mean that with her language. In other words, you're almost to the end. You can see the end. Do you have a sense that that you still will fall back into it and grapple with it more? Or do you feel like you've got your hands around it?
I think I have. I mean, it's about a lot of things, as good stories usually are. And I have been thinking a lot again about yearning. I've been thinking about, okay, so what is the yearning here? And I think there's still some more to discover about that. In the end, I sort of have a sense of what should happen in the end, and I'm not sure that I should have a sense of what should happen in the end yet.
Hey, I'm going to give you a license. I mean, I think quite often we know at least how things may end. We just don't necessarily know if it's going to be a stumble to the end or a lunge or a jump or a whatever it may be.
Yeah. So there's a lot of new writing happening right now in these and there's been a lot of, a friend of ours, somebody that you know as well, a fiber artist was talking about pulling stitches out of their work, Joanne Grabinski, pulling the stitches. I feel like I've been doing that I've been putting in stitches and pulling the stitches out. Each day I'm kind of inching a little forward. The next day I wake up and I'm like, no, that's not it. Take it back out. Try again. That's where I am now.
Beautiful. Garcia Marquez uses stitching to talk about narrative. So there you go. You've evoked one of the greats beyond us. And you are one of the greats, and I hope you will come back. It's been a pleasure. Again, one of my mentors. And I think that we'll make more mentees for you after tonight. Patricia Ann McNair, thank you.
Thank you, John. It's great to talk to you. Great to learn from you too.